So now that we completed iteration 1, we planned and set up the project, let's work on iteration number 2. The main goal for iteration number 2 is to build an app that displays a single code. So we have our app here, and we have our view, and the view simply a white screen. Before I get to adding the component, the UILabel component, if you go back to the project configuration and on the launch screen file, the launch screen is another storyboard, and you can put information on the launch screen. But for simplicity here, I'm just gonna take that out and have the launch screen become my main storyboard. So instead of the launch screen storyboard, I'm gonna launch directly into my main storyboard. The launch screen here is a storyboard very similar, so it's another screen. So you have an option to load a screen with your information or just to stay with the one we have. So I'm just gonna stay with the one we have by changing the configuration of the launch screen file to be the same as my main interface file. The view has the white background, so to highlight it more, let's change some of the attributes of the view. So while selecting the view, you can see here that I'm selecting the view. Let's switch to the attribute inspector, and you see the background color, it is white. Let's change that. So when you select the background color, it opens that window, and you can have other, and it give you the color wheel, so you can change the color to whatever you want. And you can, with the wheel, you can actually try different colors until you find the one that really meets your interest, and be the one that you would like to use. It could be maybe light gray, and I am not really a designer, so I'm gonna choose something, but you choose something that feels good with you. um, I always come to something in that range, in that area. So I'll perhaps take that. Yeah, I like that. So that will be my background color. So I changed property of the view. I can run the app to see that property in action. So here is my simulator, and here is my app with the color that I selected. Then let's bring in the component. So I want a component that represents a label. So in the lower area of the utility area, in the object library, since I'm selecting the view in the storyboard, I get a list of all the different components that are user interface components. So look here for a label. So here is the label, and it gives you a description. The label represents a variably sized amount of static text. What is clear here is that it's a static text. It's not connected to a variable. It's a text that's already known. As you will see, it implements read-only text, so you can't change it inside the app when the app is running. There's another component for that called text field if you want the user to enter the text, but the text, the user will see it and can't change it. Here the name is called label, but the gray, that's the library component that the library class or the library file that this component is based on, called UILabel. If you go to the help screen and go to documentation and API reference and open that documentation, we can search for the UILabel and learn more about what's inside that UILabel library. If I search the UILabel, and you'll see here the C means it's a class. You also see some documentation, so size, classes, and design help. So it knew that you're looking for user interface. So this is a good help to look at to understand the size classes that I talked about before, or the auto layout. These will be very important documents to look at. But here is the UILabel. And when you open that, for every component in the library, this is what the page will look like. On the left side is a list of what's inside the component. We call it a class. So here the UILabel class. On the left side is the inside of it, what goes inside it. So there are tasks and inside it, and sometimes there are data as well. So in the tasks, there are different tasks that you will need to do, and it tells you how do you get to it. So if you want to access the text attribute, which what we want to do, there's a property called text. There's also text color. There's text alignment, line break mode enabled, or what? There's sizing the label text, adjusting the font size, and different components here, managing highlight values, drawing a shadow, and different features that you might be interested in. From the discussion, we would be interested in the text. So here it gives you the text, and it tells you the text is a property, and it's referring to the text displayed by the label. It's a property, and what's important here, it tells you this is the type of that property. It's a string, and it's an optional string. That's why there's this question mark, and it is variable. That's why it has this var. If you're using Swift, if it's using Objective-C, that's what it looks like, and it gives you some information here about that property. The UILabel class, some description about the UILabel class. This is its relationship to other classes in the iOS library. The framework, it tells you what collection of libraries this belongs to. So it belongs to something called UI Kit, User Interface Kit, and it started from iOS 2.0, which means it has been around for a very long time. This is good because for something called backward compatibility, that if you use this component, anyone with an earlier iOS, with a device that runs an earlier iOS, will be able to interpret your app correctly and will be able to use. So that's how you get information about the what's inside the UILabel and what you can use. So now let's add the UILabel to our component. So we do that by simply dragging from the object library into the view with whatever location and size we want. So I'm going to add it here to the middle and to the top a little bit, and I'm going to resize it. I am expecting some quotes to be long, so it will take more than one line. So I'm going to initially size it to something that has multiple lines. Now I want you to observe that sizing, like changing the height and the width of the label, does not mean it can take more than one line. There is an attribute here on the right called lines. You see that attribute? Next to it, it says 1, meaning that this label, regardless of how big or small, it can only take one line. So I want to make this more than one line, maybe 6 lines, so that what this means is that if you have a text that goes that the first line is not enough, it will wrap to the second line and so on, so it doesn't get cut off with your when the width of the label is run. Now here is the text property, and here is the text that's being displayed, which is label. So I want to change that to my code, begin with the end in mind, and this is a code by Stephen Covey. I like that. It is a reflection with when you start anything and you want to be successful, you want to see through. So want to see at the end of this series what do you really want to be. And as you can as you notice, there is this is longer than one line. So what happened here? It wrapped into a second line because I had more than one line. Now notice what happens if I set this only to 1. It gets cut off. So you see those 3 dots, the ellipse here. That means that there is more text, but it's cut off because the label has only one line. So now if I add another line, it wraps. If you have a code that is longer, then you may need more lines, and I'm gonna add several lines here. You can adjust the alignment of that. You can adjust the color of the text, same way we did the other color. If you want to get the full and see. Well, that's actually not bad. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with that. You can change the color. You can also change the font. And if you click here on text, you get access to the system fonts. So these are, and you can go to custom fonts, and that will give you the font family. And these are all the fonts in the font book of your Mac. So if you want to use a custom font or download a font, you need to first download the font to your computer, add it to the font book, and then it will show in the font family here. And you can change the font, you can change the font style, and you can change the font size as well if you would like. Yeah, this is too big. I'll probably, yeah, I like that more. And that's becomes the properties and the single quote. So I built a single quote, and I can then test my code by running the app. And so what I'm doing here is testing according to my testing scenario for iteration 2. And that should, if the app opens with that code in it, then my testing is successful. And here it is, the begin with the end in mind. Now notice that the width here is much larger than what you see here, because as I mentioned, Xcode currently has one size for the iPhone, which is the size of the iPhone 5, which the iPhone 6 is wider and longer. So you will observe that the simulator will have more width. If you want to get exactly what you have, we can switch to the simulator for iPhone 5 or 5S, and you can run that, and it should give you exactly the dimensions that you see in front of you on the screen here. This is just gonna it's gonna take time since I'm launching a new simulator. So as you can see here, it is taking time to load the new simulator with its iOS. And once it loads, you will see the app, and hopefully the dimensions will be exactly the same. Now, the beauty of the size classes that I disabled in iteration 1 for this project is you can use constraints, and the auto layout in the iOS will adjust the dimensions based on the constraints. So if you say, I want it to be a certain margin from the device edge, it will adjust the components to retain those margin constraints that you define. So here it is. So if you want to get the exact dimensions you see in the storyboard, you would want to use the dimensions of an iPhone 5. The iPhone 6 is bigger, so you'll still gonna, your app will look great and everything will be fine, but there will be extra space in your app over there. So that completes iteration number 2.